Okay, so here is our second topic in theories of cognitive development, developing as a learner. And this is Vygotsky's theory of cognitive development. So Vygotsky was working around the same time as Piaget, but clearly he didn't work for as long as Piaget because he only lived to the age of 34. But his work has been very influential in the way that schools are run these days. The idea of setting targets for school children and students, monitoring their progress, giving them a kind of idea of where to get to their target, how to get there, and helping them along the way. So he saw the child as an apprentice, whereas Piaget saw the child as a scientist. So Vygotsky thought that the child needed to be in a social setting. They needed social interaction, whereas Piaget thought that children just explore the world and learn on their own, which is known as discovery learning. Right, have a go at this. Pause the PowerPoint here and fill in the blanks. Okay, so hopefully you filled them in. So the way that the paragraph would go, Vygotsky's main contribution is his focus on the importance of social interaction, culture and language in a child's cognitive development. The Vygotskian child makes sense of the world through shared meaning with others, whereas the Piagetian child makes sense of the world as a result of an innate maturation process that drives cognitive development. So Vygotsky thought that children were very much focused on social interaction and language in order to make meaning from their world, whereas Piaget thought that children just discovered the world and there wasn't really that element of social interaction and language. So have a pause of the PowerPoint here and just add some ideas to this spider diagram as to how social interaction and language might contribute to a child's cognitive development. Although Piaget and Vygotsky were very different in their approach, at heart they both believed the same thing. They both believed that children were curious, that they were problem solving, and that they were very much involved in their world. They wanted to take an active part in their own development. It's very unusual to see a small child who just sits still and doesn't move and isn't interested and doesn't ask questions and doesn't investigate their world. So they are at heart similar, but essentially their differences are that Piaget saw the child exploring the world on their own, whereas Vygotsky thought they needed social interaction to help them to develop properly. Vygotsky thought that children needed a more knowledgeable other, usually an adult who is experienced and who can help the child to understand the world and can contribute very, very positively to their cognitive development. We have an example here of finger pointing. So babies may just move their arm, point their finger in a way that is a random gesture. It means nothing to them. But because of the social context they are in, the adults around them ascribe meaning to that gesture. So if a baby just moves their arm and it looks as if they're pointing, the adult might say, oh, you're pointing to the cat or to the apple or to daddy or whoever. So it starts to acquire meaning. So it's only through social interaction and through being with other people that babies and children learn to give meaning to gestures and to language and to behaviours within a social context. And have a think about how this idea is similar to Piaget's theory. One of the main aspects of Vygotsky's theory is this ZPD, the zone of proximal development. This is very much used, this idea, in schools today. The ZPD is the idea that this is where the child is now, in this green ovoid here. This yellowy amber coloured ovoid is where they could get to with encouragement and help from an MKO, a more knowledgeable other. So you can push them to the furthest extent of their potential. It may be that they only reach this far because of their own limitations or the limitations of their environment or whoever is helping them. So this is very much how schools operate now. A school will see a child as being here. Now clearly for that child's progress, they don't want the child to stay there because that's just too limiting for the child. They need to progress. So they will encourage them and use strategies to push them into this here. This is the zone of proximal development. Now that is where a child can be seen to be progressing. But what may happen is that the adults involved may push the child too far into this zone, this kind of orange zone, which is beyond their reach. They are not able to get there. They can get here with the right kind of encouragement and strategies, but they're not able to get there. And to try to push the child into this zone is going to be detrimental. And you may end up with a child who is demotivated, resentful, and actually goes backward in their progress. So it's a fine balancing act. Proximal means next, what comes next. So to get into the zone of proximal development, you have to use scaffolding. So a child may be very bright, very willing to learn, very able to learn, but Vygotsky argued that they needed another person who is experienced, knowledgeable, and has the skills to help them to get there. And this is known as scaffolding. They help them bit by bit, but then they will allow the child just to progress on their own when they are able to. So it's a bit like scaffolding that you use on a building to help it stay upright while you are working on it. Now obviously we can't play this game because you're reading this at home, so we'll skip this bit. So as you can see here, scaffolding is used to support a structure while work is being done on it. It's the same principle in Vygotsky's theory. Support and prompting is usually provided by an adult, which helps a child achieve cognitive tasks they couldn't achieve alone. Now, if you over-scaffold, then you give the child too much help. You do not allow them to grow, to develop, to think on their own. So you can't give them too much support. But equally at the beginning, you can't just leave them to get on with it. They need guidance. But bit by bit, you remove the scaffolding. You don't take it away all at once, but you take away the aspects of the support that the child doesn't need anymore. It's like the child is growing up and you are gradually moving away from them because they're becoming more independent. Their cognitive skills have improved to the extent that they don't need you to help them in the way that they once did. Okay, so have a think about how this might work in a real life scenario. Think about what happens in schools with teaching assistants and the way that teachers may structure work for a class. So, this is a quote from Vygotsky, obviously, and this is a quote from Piaget. So you can see that they are different. And have a think about what your view of each is. Right, now we're going to look at a key study. The key study we're looking at for Vygotsky is Connor and Cross. It's in the core companion. Once you've read through the study, compile a list of the differences between the study and Samuel and Bryant's. Remember, we did Samuel and Bryant for Piaget. Identify a strength and a limitation that is not in the book, so it's from your own genius head, yeah, your own idea. So you'll want to pause the presentation here and complete that task. Okay, so once you've completed that last task, here is some evaluation of Vygotsky's theory. So every time you see something in red, a question in red or a task in red, pause the presentation and write your ideas down. Remember that credibility means, does this theory stand up? Does this idea stand up? Is it something that is going to actually work? It's a kind of another word for validity. And remember that operationalize means put it into practice. For your IA, you had to operationalize your IV and your DV. So it simply means, how do you test Vygotsky's theory? How can you measure the ZPD and scaffolding? I'll give you a hint there, it's not as easy as measuring Piaget's theory because you cannot conduct lab experiments to measure it. It's much more of something that would unfold over time, and it's much more difficult to measure. It's less tangible, you can't really pin it down. Okay, here are 2 possible exam questions that you may get. I like this exam question here simply because contrast is very straightforward. You just look at the differences between the 2 theories. You can acknowledge the similarities, but you don't focus on the similarities. You use the similarities almost to give you a point of difference. So you might say something like, although both Piaget and Vygotsky were interested in the curiosity of children, in their potential for learning and exploration of their environment, they each approached the topic in very different ways. So this is the question we are going to focus on and you're going to be writing. Now, to prepare for this, I like to do something called the double bubble. So we all know about bubbles during lockdown, don't we? In this strange new world we're part of. But let's apply it to Piaget and Vygotsky. A double bubble is simply where you take the 2 topics of interest and down the middle you put their similarities, and then round the edges, spider diagram, you list what is unique to them, so their differences. Let's take Father Christmas and the Tooth Fairy. Fill in this double bubble. So for example, the Father Christmas and the Tooth Fairy, what do they have in common? What is similar? I'm afraid neither of them exist. So that's a similarity. Sorry to break it to you if you thought that both of these were actual people or that they existed. They don't exist. So that's a similarity between them. You, I'm sure, can add further similarities. Now, differences between them, we've got their supposed gender. Father Christmas is male and the Tooth Fairy is female. And look, so let's list differences and similarities between Father Christmas and the Tooth Fairy. Have a go at that. Pause the presentation here. Okay, and now you're going to do exactly the same thing with Piaget and Vygotsky. How are they similar? Put that down the middle, but have lots and lots more differences. And just as you did for the previous task where you were looking at Connor and Cross, include the studies. What we already know the differences between the studies because you've just been looking at them. So in an essay on contrast the theories, you use the studies, the points of contrast between the studies, to help you construct the essay. It's a really nice essay, this one. Personally, I think it is. I think it's a gift. I think it would be great if this came up on the exam. Here is your essay title. Now, if you approach this as a describe, evaluate question, you will not get a high mark because you are not doing what the question asked you to do. The question is asking you to contrast 2 theories of cognitive development. So if you say, here's Piaget's theory, I'm going to evaluate it. Here's Vygotsky's theory, I'm going to evaluate it. You have not answered the question, so don't do that. Now, the way to go about it is to bring in a main idea. For example, Piaget's theory focuses on the child as a little scientist in that blah blah blah, contrast it. Whereas Vygotsky's idea, sorry about this, it keeps jumping. Whereas Vygotsky's idea is that the child is a little apprentice. In other words, they have to work under the guidance of a more knowledgeable other. This is a contrasting point between the 2 because keep using the word contrast. In contrast to, contrasting with this, however, on the other hand, whereas Piaget thought this, Vygotsky thought that. If you write Piaget thought this, Vygotsky thought that, Piaget thought that, it's not, you're not making it obvious enough that you are contrasting. You must show that you are contrasting. You can get a really good mark here if you contrast the theories and contrast the studies and then contrast the kind of evaluation points. You know, what's an issue with Piaget is that it's a universal theory, but he doesn't apply it to social context. He doesn't apply it to culture. He thinks that all children develop at the same rate, whereas Vygotsky's theory is much more tailor-made for the individual child. A ZPD is like an individually tailored education plan for each child. So there you have, within the evaluation of the theories, you've got contrasting points. You have to be clever, you have to be resourceful in the way that you contrast. You've got to practice, basically. With this essay and with every single other essay you are going to write for your IB Psychology exam, you have to practice writing the exam. That's the only way to get good at doing exams. Sitting at home and highlighting notes is going to get you nowhere, nowhere. And every single year there are students who think because they highlight their notes in lots of lovely colours that they will do well in the exam. No. If you were going to do a piano exam and you got your sheet of music and you highlighted it in lots of different colours and you never practiced playing the piano, what do you think will happen? Yep, you won't pass your piano exam. It's the same way with essays. Writing an essay is like playing a piece of music. If you don't practice it, you won't be very good at it. Sorry to break it to you like that, but it's the truth. I had to do it, other people had to do it. Just practice, practice, practice. Write those exams, those essays. Right, okay, so here's one I prepared earlier. Here is a contrasting paragraph. I'll let you read it. Let you think about how it satisfies the contrast command term. Pause it here. And here is another beautiful paragraph of contrasting. Again, look at the point, look at what I've highlighted in red. Now you might say, oh, that doesn't contain the word contrast. Well, you don't want to hit your examiner over the head with the word contrast 85 million times through your essay. You find other ways of saying, look, I'm contrasting. So there we have it in this phrase. Piaget claimed that, in contrast, Vygotsky's view. Or you could have said, whereas Vygotsky's view, however Vygotsky's view, more in line with. Now, if you just said his theory takes a nurture approach, more in line with, the word more suggests you're comparing it to something else. You're going to be saying the other one is less, yeah, than on Piaget's. So they are both contrasting points. They are both saying, look, I'm contrasting the theories. Vygotsky believed that, whereas Piaget claimed that. You're basically saying the same thing, but you're adding this whereas, believe that, claim that, whereas it's all contrasting. And the only way to get good at this, guess what? Yes, you have to practice. No big surprise there. So here is a table of some of the differences between the two theories. Don't just learn this table and write your essay based on it. This is just an example. Be more self-reliant in the way that you write your essays. Come up with your own ideas. Don't just quote what you've read from a textbook. These are some ideas, they are not all of the ideas. You can think of some good ideas too and use the research. Use Samuel and Bryant and Connor and Cross in the way that you build your essay. So you're looking at contrasting points between the two studies. And that marks the end of this PowerPoint. Goodbye for now.